the potential attack against Iran coming from Benjamin Netanyahu. So there was a report in the CNN about a leak coming from the United States that Israel is actually more likely now to conduct an attack against Iran. Talking about the United States getting new information, new intelligence, suggesting that Israel is making preparations to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, even as the Trump administration has been pursuing a diplomatic deal with Tehran. Now, if we go back, we see that Israel made so many statements against Iran, so many threats against Iran. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump himself made statements against Iran. He warned Iran from a potential attack if they don't reach a deal. However, how likely is Benjamin Netanyahu to conduct an attack against Iran, especially with this climate now? So if we go back in the past 18 months, Benjamin Netanyahu had multiple fronts open, and he still does. Benjamin Netanyahu, whenever he reached the stage where things were getting too much for him, he would go and escalate and have an attack. Now, the likelihood of Israel attacking Iran is more likely. Why? Well, firstly, there were moves from Israel that have happened for the first time in a very, very long time. For example, one of their squadrons of the Israeli Air Force, where they train and practice long-distance attacks, they took all of these forces and gathered them in the Israeli Air Force. They were supposed to conduct training for Israeli pilots, but now they're recruiting them in the Israeli Air Force, meaning that Israel is preparing, or at least needing, more forces in case there is a prospect of a potential attack, whether it's against Iran or against Yemen, or if they simply want more forces, or if they have any more need for any more pilots to attack inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu himself is in deep trouble. Benjamin Netanyahu today, he is confronting the Israeli Supreme Court again. He has internal pressure, he has external pressure. And this is one of the ways that he can potentially alleviate the pressure by potentially attracting sympathy from some of these allies who are criticizing him now in an attack against Iran. Why is there also likelihood that Benjamin Netanyahu would attack Iran? Well, it's because Benjamin Netanyahu has a backing in Israel to attack Iran. For the past several decades, all of the talk in Israel was about Iran being the head of the snake, Iran supporting all of these movements that are resisting Israel, Iran arming them, Iran causing destabilization, networks of people working for Iran in Israel time after time. Even in the past week, we've had 3 reports of networks operating inside of Israel working for Iran, doing moves in Israel, gathering information, taking certain action, being paid in cash and being paid in cryptocurrency. All of that is happening. So Israel knows that Iran is a threat to them, despite the fact that Iran is not, by the way, eyeing out a conflict at the moment. Even when they attacked Israel, their attacks were quite limited. But the reason I'm mentioning this is to understand or clarify a bit more that there is indeed a prospect of Benjamin Netanyahu carrying out such an attack, deviating from the eyes on him now. All eyes are on Gaza. All eyes are on the Gaza Strip now. Everyone is seeing what they're doing. Even the countries that are constantly supportive of Israel, legitimizing its campaign of barbarism inside of the Gaza Strip, are now saying, we can't buy that anymore. The statement of Britain, France, and Canada about the levels of aid going inside the Gaza Strip being inadequate, that Israel needs to stop the war immediately and allow all aid in immediately. All of these things are adding pressure. Now, he has the backing, he has the support. That doesn't necessarily mean he will go on that war, but the fact is there is more likelihood. The third interesting point in all of this is the fact that this statement, this clarification, is coming from the United States. The United States is outright leaking information saying that Israel has suspicious movements now in its air force, and it's conducting air drills, not with the United States on its own, but Israel said many times, we're willing to attack Iran on our own. Doesn't matter how suicidal you may think that mission is, or how much of a failure it would be, they are planning. But the fact that the United States is leaking this report, it's as if the United States is warning Iran in a way that, look, they actually might attack. There are increased chances and there's increased likelihood. Not to say that Iran is waiting on any such reports, by the way, but it has its significance. Iran already has the information that it needs. It monitors what Israel does 24/7. Iran clearly has eyes inside of Israel. Well, Israel is confirming, every Monday and Friday they catch a group of people operating for Iran, and these are the only people who are being arrested, by the way, and captured. We're not talking about people who haven't been found yet. So in short, there is likelihood there. However, Benjamin Netanyahu knows that there's a cost to pay. Benjamin Netanyahu was shivering when Iran carried out True Promise 2. Iran isn't intending to escalate. Iran is actually looking to de-escalate the situation. However, if Benjamin Netanyahu goes on an attack against Iran, people need to expect the unexpected. Like how Iran surprised us in April 2024 and in October 2024, this time the surprise will be even bigger. And Israel will not be able to necessarily contain that attack. The one that happened in October 2024, over 90% of the missiles landed, and we saw them landing live from people recording in Israel, taking the risk despite censorship, despite orders not to record, not anything. Everyone was recording, everything was being published. Now that's on the front of Iran. Moving on to the next thing, Benjamin Netanyahu's internal problems. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing more and more problems. He sacked the Israeli head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar. He faced criticism and problems internally when he sacked him. However, now the Israeli Supreme Court is saying that this sacking is actually illegal. It is not right. It's not in accordance with the law, and Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have a right to appoint a new IDF chief of staff. That's something very problematic for Benjamin Netanyahu. So we had this report here talking about the situation in relation to Ronen Bar. The Supreme Court is telling Benjamin Netanyahu he should refrain from a new appointment. Why? Because there was a conflict of interest in relation to the head of the Shin Bet in light of the investigation into the Qatar Gate affair and the classified documents. The Qatar Gate affair was the famous case that, was ongoing under Ronen Bar, investigating lobbying coming from Qatar, sending money to senior figures in the Netanyahu government or his administration, some of his aides, something that Netanyahu, of course, strongly denies. And that's why he started to escalate with Ronen Bar, saying that it's all politicized, all political, and it doesn't have any sort of basis, although the investigation was established and based on substantial evidence and information about lobbying that the United States is connected to, by the way. So the money was being channeled through Qatar to the United States, to these people. Of course, Qatar also denies that too, by the way. However, the Israeli Shin Bet was carrying out this investigation like they were carrying out an investigation into what they call the Jewish section in the Israeli police who were basically convicted terrorists or followers of convicted terrorists inside of Israel. Imagine the level. Under Itamar Ben-Gvir, because he has the ultimate responsibility over the Israeli police as the Minister of National Security inside the state of Israel. Now, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, he made a statement. He came up after all of this criticism, and he came up after the Supreme Court orders telling him, no, you should not appoint a new IDF chief of staff. And he said, no, the government headed by me will appoint the head of the Shin Bet. By the way, that was the first press conference in months for Benjamin Netanyahu. He's saying that, no, we will be appointing head of the Shin Bet, and we're not going to follow, basically not going to follow the orders of the Israeli Supreme Court. Time after time, the Israeli Prime Minister confronts the Supreme Court. Now, what's very important in this is the fact that Netanyahu has the power to act arrogant with the Supreme Court and challenge the Supreme Court because he's the Prime Minister. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu is keen on remaining in the position of the Prime Minister. The Supreme Court forced Benjamin Netanyahu to start going to the court hearings and face corruption charges. That was something that Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't about to face before. And that's why he wanted to be the Prime Minister. In Israel, political movements were calling to initiate a law, to have a law in Israel that bans anyone facing certain corruption charges from running to the position of the Prime Minister. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, won the position. He had this coalition since 2021. And he said, no, I'm going to continue. Nothing's going to happen. But during the war, and Netanyahu, of course, used the war as an excuse, the Supreme Court said, hold on, we are going to force you to go and face the consequences of your corruption charges, which made him even more adamant to remain in his position, and is yet another reason why he wants to continue the genocide in Gaza and expand and have more tensions in the region. Why? Because when he is the Prime Minister, not only can he challenge the Israeli Supreme Court and act arrogant with the Supreme Court, he can also get excuses to get out from the court. So Benjamin Netanyahu, multiple times, almost every hearing that he faces, he will use an excuse to get out of the hearing. He will go out for 2 hours to speak with Steve Witkoff. He will go out for an urgent security briefing. He will go out to authorize a certain move that needs to be implemented urgently at that time, or he will call for a certain cancellation because he's the Prime Minister and he needs to take action. And that's why now he's also again acting arrogant with the Israeli Supreme Court. And guess what? The Supreme Court, there's a limit to how far they can go. There's a limit to how far they can go with all of the situation with Benjamin Netanyahu. It's very tricky because he is the authority at the end of the day. So even if the Israeli Supreme Court, for example, they came and issued an order to start the conscription process and enforce it against the Orthodox community, Netanyahu delayed it. And even when it started to be implemented by certain movements or certain bodies within the Israeli army, Benjamin Netanyahu tried to hinder that to protect his coalition.